The wind whispered through the narrow alleys of the old town, carrying with it the faint scent of roasted maize and dust. Beneath a broken street lamp sat an old woman, her wrinkled hands trembling as she held out an empty tin cup. Her name was Mama Grace, once the heart of her village, now a face most people passed without a glance. She wore dignity like a crown, even as the world saw only her torn shawl and tired eyes. That night, a black luxury car stopped across the street. The driver stepped out first, adjusting his suit, before opening the back door for a tall man in a crisp designer coat. Cameras clicked instantly. Reporters whispered his name with reverence. Damien Cato, the youngest billionaire in the country. A man whose face was on every magazine cover, whose company stretched across continents. But as his gaze swept the street, his confident expression faltered. His mother, the woman he had searched for months, was right there, sitting barefoot, begging for coins. Mother! His voice broke the silence like thunder. The crowd's murmurs rose as he crossed the road, ignoring the flashing cameras. He kneeled before her, tears welling up in eyes that had once been filled with ambition and pride. "Mama Grace, it's me, your son." But she didn't move, didn't smile. Her gaze stayed fixed on the ground, her lips whispering something no one could hear. "I told you I don't need your money, Damien," she said finally, her voice hoarse but steady. "You left home chasing wealth, but you lost your soul along the way. Now you come back with gold, but I see no warmth in your heart." The crowd fell silent. Damien's assistant tried to step forward, but one look from him stopped the man cold. "Mother, please," he pleaded, lowering his head. "I built everything for you. The mansion, the cars, the life you deserved. Why live like this?" Mama Grace finally looked up, her eyes filled with both pain and pride. "Because I wanted you to remember where you came from. You think money makes you powerful, but humility makes you human. You forgot the woman who sold fruit on the roadside to send you to school." He wanted to speak, to argue, to make her understand, but no words came. The crowd was now recording the story of the billionaire kneeling before a beggar woman spreading like wildfire. Damien turned to his guards and waved them off. "Go," he said quietly. "Leave us." They hesitated, then obeyed. Mama Grace slowly stood, her frail frame swaying under the cold evening wind. She placed a hand on his cheek. "My son, I am proud of your success, but I cannot live a life built on what you forgot. Until you learn that kindness is worth more than gold, I will live among those who remind me what real wealth is." Tears slid down his face, and for the first time in years, he felt small, like the boy who used to chase goats in the fields, barefoot and laughing. He followed her silently as she walked toward a small shelter nearby. The place was dim, filled with children huddled under old blankets, their faces lighting up as Mama Grace entered. She knelt beside them, distributing the few coins she had collected that day, smiling like a queen among her people. Damien stood by the door, frozen. One of the children tugged at his trouser. "Uncle," the boy said softly, "Mama Grace gives us food every day. She says angels don't need riches to feed the hungry." He turned his gaze to her again. The billionaire who had built towers couldn't build the strength to speak. For the first time, he realized that maybe his mother wasn't rejecting him. She was saving him. That night, Damien didn't return to his hotel. He stayed at the shelter, sitting beside his mother as she told bedtime stories to the children. Her laughter filled the air like music, and he found himself smiling through tears he didn't bother to hide. But even as dawn broke and the first light touched their faces, Mama Grace's eyes looked far away, as if she knew something he didn't. Something deeper, unspoken, waiting to unfold. "My son, now you understand." The words fell from her lips like a final breath of wisdom. Damien froze, every muscle in his body tightening as her hand went limp in his. The world outside was still roaring with rain, but inside that small shelter, time itself seemed to stop. He looked at her face, serene, glowing faintly in the lantern light, and something inside him shattered. "Mama, no, please," he whispered, shaking her gently, as though he could call her spirit back from wherever it had gone. "Not now. I'm not ready." But her smile stayed, soft and knowing, as if she had been waiting for that exact moment, the one where her son's heart finally learned the weight of love, not gold. The children, sensing something wrong, gathered at the doorway. Their little faces were wet with tears before he could even speak. The smallest girl, the one who had called Mama Grace an angel, stepped forward and touched her hand. "She's sleeping, isn't she?" Damien's voice broke. "Yes," he said softly. "She's just sleeping." But they all knew. That night, the storm poured until dawn, washing the streets clean, as if the heavens themselves wept for her. Damien stayed beside her all through the night, his head bowed, his hand never leaving hers. The world outside might have called him the youngest billionaire in Africa, the prodigy of wealth. But in that moment, he was only a son, kneeling in the ashes of everything he'd once misunderstood. When morning came, the first rays of sunlight slipped through the broken roof, landing on her still face. It looked almost like she was smiling at the warmth. The shelter was silent except for the muffled sobs of the children. Damien stood slowly, his eyes red and hollow, but his heart strangely calm. He walked outside, and the villagers who had gathered watched in silence. No chauffeur, no suit, no bodyguards. Just a man carrying his mother's body in his arms, through the muddy streets. Each step was heavy but sacred, like he was carrying the weight of every mistake he had ever made. And finally, setting it down where it belonged. He buried her on a hill overlooking the village, beneath the same tree where she used to tell him stories as a child. The soil was soft, dark, alive, and when the last handful covered her grave, he whispered, "I'll make you proud, Mama, not with riches, but with purpose." For days, he didn't leave that place. The press eventually found him, of course, drones hovering, reporters shouting questions about the billionaire who had chosen to live among beggars. But Damien said nothing. He let them write what they wanted. Their headlines couldn't define what he had just found. Weeks passed, and one morning, a convoy of trucks appeared on the outskirts of the same slum. But this time, they weren't for him. They were for the people. Workers began unloading timber, bricks, paint, and food supplies. Children ran beside the vehicles, laughing, not understanding the miracle unfolding before them. Damien stood before them all, wearing nothing but a plain shirt and sandals. "This land," he said quietly, "belongs to the people Mama Grace loved. It will be a home for every child she fed, every soul she comforted." He pointed to a large banner that read the Grace Foundation, where love builds futures. The villagers cheered, some cried. Mama Grace's name would live forever, not as a beggar's, but as a mother's legacy, a symbol of dignity and compassion. Days turned into months. The shelter became a school, then a clinic, then a community center. Damien worked alongside the locals, planting, building, teaching. Gone was the man obsessed with profit margins and prestige. He had become something rarer, a man whose wealth finally had meaning. He would sit with the children in the evenings, under the same tree where his mother now rested, and tell them stories of her strength, her laughter, her stubborn heart. Sometimes he'd pause mid-story, looking at their eager faces, and see her reflection in their eyes. One night, as the sun melted into the horizon, he walked up the hill to her grave. Fireflies glimmered in the dusk like floating stars. He placed a single white lily on the mound of earth and knelt. "I finally understand," he said quietly. "You didn't refuse my money because you hated what I became. You refused it because you wanted me to see what true wealth is." He closed his eyes and let the silence answer him. A soft breeze swept across the hill, rustling the leaves of the tree above, almost like a whisper, gentle and approving. He smiled, tears catching the light of the setting sun. Months later, Damien returned to his company headquarters for the first time since her passing. The board members were stunned. The once sharp billionaire now stood humbler, quieter, yet somehow more powerful than ever. He restructured everything. Half of his annual profits went directly into social programs, schools, hospitals, clean water initiatives. His business empire transformed into a lifeline for thousands. And when people asked why, he always said the same thing. "Because one woman taught me that pride isn't in having wealth, it's in knowing how to share it." Years rolled on, and the Grace Foundation grew across the continent. Every building bore a mural of Mama Grace, her kind eyes, her weathered face, her gentle smile. The same woman who once begged in the streets had become a symbol of hope for millions. But Damien never stopped visiting that hill. Every year, on the anniversary of her passing, he returned alone. No cameras, no assistants. Just him and the sound of the wind moving through the grass. He'd sit beneath the tree for hours, sometimes speaking, sometimes listening, as though she still sat beside him, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, watching the world she left behind blossom with purpose. One particular evening, years later, as he sat there with a cup of tea, her favorite, he noticed a young woman walking up the hill, carrying flowers. She looked shy but determined. "Mr. Cato," she asked. He smiled. "Just Damien, please." She placed the flowers on the grave. "I grew up in the orphanage your mother built," she said softly. "Now I'm a teacher here, for the children she once fed. I just wanted to say thank you for continuing her light." Damien's throat tightened. He looked at the flowers, bright against the fading daylight, and whispered, "No, thank her. She was the light. I'm just carrying the flame." As the woman left, Damien looked up at the stars beginning to flicker above. Somewhere deep inside, he felt his mother's presence, not as a memory, but as a living part of everything around him. The laughter of children, the hands building homes, the prayers whispered at night. All of it was her voice echoing through the world she changed. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of the earth after rain. For the first time, he didn't feel sorrow when he thought of her. Only peace, the kind that comes when love has fulfilled its purpose. In the distance, he could hear the sound of drums and singing from the village below. A celebration, a new school being opened. The people were dancing, the children's voices rising in joyful harmony. And above it all, the wind seemed to carry a familiar whisper, warm, loving, eternal. "My son, now you understand." He smiled, tears shining on his cheeks, and whispered back, "I do, Mama. I do." The stars above burned brighter, and as Damien stood, he looked at the world she had left him. Not a world of wealth, but of meaning. The air shimmered with life, with gratitude, with the pulse of everything she'd ever stood for. He walked down the hill, past the school, past the laughter, past the gardens that had once been barren land. Every step felt lighter, every breath deeper. He could almost hear her humming, the same lullaby she used to sing when he was a boy. And as he reached the heart of the village, the lanterns glowing like golden souls around him, Damien realized something profound. His mother had never really left. She lived in every smile, every act of kindness, every beating heart that chose love over pride. The billionaire who once thought he owned the world now knew the truth. The world belonged to those who gave, not those who kept. And somewhere, beneath that ancient tree on the hill, the wind carried the faintest laughter, a mother's pride, eternal and unbroken. The morning light crept through the gaps in the tin roof, painting soft stripes across the floor of the shelter. Mama Grace was already awake, stirring a pot of porridge over a charcoal stove. The children slept in a tangled mess of arms and blankets, their breathing gentle and steady. Damien watched her silently from his spot near the door, his designer jacket draped awkwardly over his knees. He felt out of place, a man of suits and skyscrapers in a world that smelled of smoke and maize flour. Yet, for the first time in years, he didn't want to leave. "Mama," he said softly, breaking the stillness, "why didn't you tell me you were here?" She didn't look up. "You wouldn't have listened, my son. You were too busy speaking the language of the rich, numbers, deals, profit. You wouldn't have understood mine." Her words hit him harder than any business loss ever could. He rose and moved closer, squatting beside her. The fire crackled between them, the smoke curling into the ceiling like fragile dreams. "Then teach me your language again," he murmured. Mama Grace smiled faintly. "It's not something I can teach. You must live it." She handed him the wooden spoon. "Start by stirring." He hesitated, then took the spoon. The porridge was thick and heavy, the heat rising up to his face. His perfectly manicured hands trembled as he stirred, earning a quiet chuckle from his mother. "See, you're not as strong as the boy who used to climb mango trees." He smiled sheepishly. I guess the boardroom softened me. For a while, neither spoke. The children began to stir, and soon the small room buzzed with laughter and chatter. Mama Grace moved among them with grace, serving bowls of porridge, tying loose shoelaces, wiping sleepy eyes. Damien helped awkwardly at first, spilling a bit of porridge, drawing giggles from the little ones. But gradually, he began to laugh too, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep. After breakfast, Mama Grace gathered the children in a circle for prayers. Her voice rose and fell with warmth and conviction. Damien bowed his head, but his thoughts wandered. He looked around, cracked walls, thin mats, hungry faces, and he felt something twist inside him. Shame, maybe, or guilt. He had built empires, yet these children, who had nothing, seemed richer in spirit. Later, when the children went to school, Mama Grace sat on the wooden bench outside, watching the sun climb higher. Damien joined her, bringing 2 cups of tea. She accepted hers with a nod. "You could rebuild this place," he said carefully. "Give them beds, food, clothes. I could do it quietly in your name." She turned to him, her gaze firm but kind. "And what lesson would that teach them, Damien? That salvation comes from a man with money." She sipped her tea. "No. Let them learn that love builds more than wealth ever can." He sighed, frustrated. "But Mama, you can't keep living like this. You're not young anymore. I can take care of you. A house, medical care, anything you want." Mama Grace's eyes softened. "You already gave me what I wanted, my son. You became strong. You survived. The rest is your journey, not mine." He stared at her, lost for words. The wind carried the sound of laughter from the street, vendors calling out prices, children playing football with a plastic bottle. Life moved on around them, simple and raw. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked finally. "Our home, the life before all this." She smiled wistfully. "Every day. But the earth doesn't mourn the leaf that falls. It waits for the seed that grows. I had to let go of what was gone so I could become what these children need." Damien followed her gaze to a little girl chasing a stray dog near the fence. Her laughter echoed like bells, bright and pure. He suddenly understood. His mother wasn't just surviving here. She was living her purpose. As the day wore on, Damien stayed by her side, helping her sort through donations, repair old clothes, sweep the floor. The people of the community looked at him with curiosity. The billionaire who was once a ghost in their world, now walking barefoot on their dusty roads. Some whispered in disbelief. Others smiled quietly, recognizing humility when they saw it. By evening, the sky had turned orange and gold. Mama Grace lit a small lantern inside as the children returned. Damien handed out small fruit he had bought from the market. Nothing expensive, just oranges and bananas. The children's faces lit up with gratitude, and he felt something stir in his chest again. He hadn't felt this kind of peace since he was a boy. "Mama," he said later, as they sat outside watching the stars blink to life, "do you think people can change? Truly change?" She looked up at the night sky. "Only if they stop trying to prove they've changed. Change is not a show, it's a quiet surrender." Her words sank deep into him. He thought of his office, the glass walls, the endless meetings, the cold applause. He had spent years trying to prove his worth to a world that never really cared who he was beneath the success. But sitting beside his mother, barefoot on the dirt floor, he felt seen in a way he hadn't in years. A sudden cough escaped her lips, deep, raspy, unsettling. Damien's heart clenched. "Mama, are you all right?" She waved him off. "Just the cold night air." But he wasn't convinced. He placed a hand on her back, feeling how thin she had become. "You're sick," he said quietly. "Please, let me take you to a hospital." She shook her head. "Not now. The children need me." He wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him. It was the same look she had when he was a boy and wanted sweets before dinner, gentle but unyielding. The next morning, he woke before dawn. She was gone. Panic gripped him as he searched the shelter, then stepped outside. He found her behind the building, kneeling in prayer. The first light of day framed her like a halo. He froze, watching her whisper words into the wind. Words of gratitude, not request. She wasn't praying for help. She was giving thanks. Even now, with so little, she was grateful. Something broke inside him. He walked to her, knelt beside her, and bowed his head. For the first time, he prayed. Not for success or forgiveness, but for understanding. And as the sun rose, he made a silent promise. To learn the value of life, the way his mother lived it. To rebuild not just with money, but with meaning. Days passed. Damien stayed longer than he planned. He began visiting nearby markets, buying supplies for the shelter. He built a small garden behind the building, teaching the older kids how to plant vegetables. He fixed the broken roof himself, his soft hands growing calloused and strong again. Mama Grace watched him with quiet pride. "You see," she said one evening, "now you're learning the language." He smiled. "I think I'm starting to understand." But deep inside, he sensed something changing in her, a stillness, like the calm before a storm. She moved slower now, her cough growing deeper each night. And though she tried to hide it, Damien saw it all. One evening, as rain drummed softly on the roof, she reached for his hand. "Promise me something, my son," she whispered. "Anything, Mama. Whatever you build next, build it with love." Her voice trembled, and he felt his throat tighten. He wanted to ask what she meant, but she only smiled faintly, closing her eyes for a moment as if lost in thought. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the children huddled closer together. Damien sat beside her in silence, holding her hand as the storm gathered strength. But even through the sound of rain, he could hear her breathing slow, calm, peaceful, as though the world around her no longer carried weight. He squeezed her hand gently, whispering, "Mama, I'm here." She opened her eyes and smiled, that same proud, gentle smile she had worn since the day he first walked. And then, softly, she whispered something he almost didn't hear.